So we are very pleased, moi-même j'ai du mal à parler, to welcome Donatella, who is a political science professor at the Scuola Normale in Florence. She's one of the leading scholars in social movement studies. She's been working on the policing of protest and repression of social movements, worked on the No Global movement as well a few years ago. And so she recently published in Italian so far, but maybe translations are coming, this book, Guerra all'antisemitismo, il panico morale come strumento di repressione politica, qu'on peut traduire par guerre à l'antisémitisme, la panique morale, point d'interrogation. On va arriver avec les slides, la panique morale comme instrument de répression politique. Et Donatella, donc je repasse à l'anglais, pardon. Donatella, who spent a lot of time in Germany in particular, studied the repression of the pro-Palestinian movement in Germany, and that's the core of her book. Probably you speak a little bit about Italy, and we'll see how much I think it resonates with what we've been talking about in the French context. And we invited Kinda, and Caterina should be arriving in a minute. She was just finishing her classes, actually, who are both lecturer here in political science in Lille. They are both really active also in a collective of researchers and professors active on the Palestinian question here in Lille. So probably you'll be also able, Kinda and Caterina maybe as well, to talk about the question of academic freedoms and maybe the kind of pressures you personally also experienced on your mobilization on this issue in the last years. So Kinda is an anthropologist, lecturer here, and she's specialized in the study of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and more broadly on the revolutionary movements in the Middle East. And Caterina Bandini, who is arriving in a minute, she told me 6:45, is a specialist of the role of religious actors in the Israelo-Palestinian conflict. So immediately I give you the floor, Donatella, and I will put the PowerPoint. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this invitation. And I want to say that I can take questions in French later on. I can even try to speak French because I used to do it. Yes, you can, no problem. I could have just follow all the discussion before, but my French is a bit dormant, and it is better to proceed in English. I come from to talk about two different pieces of research that we are doing in this moment at the Scuola Normale Superiore, which focus on the movements for a free Palestine and against the Israeli genocide and on its repression. So I started to look at the repression of the protests on Palestine in Germany, almost by chance, because I'd been working on different forms of repressions, like the policing of protest. But I was in Germany for a couple of months in the beginning of 2024. And if you can put the next slide, I was in particularly there when, as you may have seen, during the awarding ceremony of the Berlinale, when a collective of Israeli and Palestinian directors had won the award for the best documentary. They talked about the situation in Gaza, and they were immediately attacked. And one of them, Abram, told The Guardian to stand on German soil as the son of an Holocaust survivor and call for a ceasefire, and to then be labeled as anti-Semitic is not only outrageous, it is also literally putting Jewish lives in danger. His life and also the life of his Palestinian co-author. He added, I don't know what Germany is trying to do with us. If this is Germany's way of dealing with its guilt over the Holocaust, they're emptying it of all meanings. And this was not the first events that happened after October 7 in Germany, in which Jewish people were accused of anti-Semitism by the descendants of those who had persecuted and killed their family members. It had started, and also my attention to the topic had started when the foundations of the Green Party, the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, had cancelled the awarding ceremony for Masha Gessen, who is a Jewish journalist of Russian origins, because Gessen had compared in an article the situation in Gaza with the situations in Warsaw Ghetto during German Nazi occupation. So puzzling things which have been mentioned also before in the debate. It is a situation in which Jewish people are accused of anti-Semitism, but also the left is accused of anti-Semitism, and especially there are inventions of terms like imported anti-Semitism, left-wing anti-Semitism, milieu anti-Semitism, that point at the fact that anti-Semitism is something coming from outside, of which Germans, but could be said also French people or others, are not responsible any longer. So it is a series of assumptions that aimed at building visions in which activists in solidarity with Palestine could be accused of a crime like anti-Semitism, while racist actors in governments accused the immigrant community and the left as their sort of supporters of being anti-Semitic themselves. This was not the only case. Germany is a sort of magnifying lenses for what is happening in France as well. According to a recent collections of data by pro-Palestinian organizations, in Germany alone there have been 175 forms of cases of censorship and defamations, 154 arrests and legal enforcement, 137 legal, financial, professional deprivations, firing of people, and so on. What is relevant is also that, as someone mentioned in the roundtable just a few minutes ago, it was not just the police, it was not just the governments, but it was sort of uncivic society organizations, not only the organizations of officially pro-Israeli, but in Germany it was the Green Parties. It was so-called anti-Germans, that is the factions of crazy factions of the Antifa movement in Germany. It was the SPD, so the Social Democrats, and it was a situation in which no one in the so-called liberal left reacted to this. But it was also a situation in which the mass media converged, the universities converged in this type of campaigns. Why these repressions? I'd studied in the past repressions in different forms of movement organizations. Sometimes repressions happens when protests escalate and radicalize. It was the case I studied in Italy in the 70s. But the movements that has been repressed everywhere in Europe and also in the United States has been extremely peaceful. Boycotting has been mentioned as an alternative to any type of violence. And there's been a movement in which many type of claims have converged. And so also in, for instance, in the Italian case that I know best from the point of view of the movement itself, there was a convergence of existing networks of international solidarities, so of movement organizations and civil society organizations that had mobilized in the past against the war, against poverty, against colonialism and colonial legacies. It's a movement for sure against capitalism, racism, and patriarchy, putting together these different concerns within conceptions of intersectional inequalities. But it was also, and it is, a movement against the far right, a movement against the backlash in terms of the repressions of democratic freedoms, a movement in the educational sectors, a movement in the labor sectors, as the leader of the CGT just mentioned. And what we have seen in recent times in Italy, Monday was a turning point, acknowledged as the moment in which all the previous wave of protests have catalyzed in a big protest. In Italy, it was the 22nd of September. In Spain, it was around the Vuelta. But what we saw is that movements that had been built since October tended at the same time to converge in mass demonstrations, but also to become rooted in the societies through various forms of actions. In this moment, the impression is that people are actively thinking, what can I do? And they try to do it. They're not just thinking about it. But you had Stop al Genocidio, was the artist in La Scala di Milano, so the biggest Italian theater on September 22nd. The convergence of this protest on September 22nd emerged in the harbors, emerged from dock workers who mobilized, stopping the ships carrying arms in Genova, and were able in a short period to get the support of the church, of the Catholic Church, especially the left-wing pacifist side of the church, to get the support of the mayor of Genova, and to spread these forms of protest. So in a couple of weeks, ships bringing military equipments to Israel have been stopped in Ravenna, in Livorno, and very recently also in the south. Other forms of protest have been involving hunger strike by 15,000 health workers on one single day, all striking with a sign, we strike against the Israeli genocide. So it has been a huge protest that started with the workers in Genova saying, if you block the Sumud flotilla, we will block everything. I think they could do that also because they were workers in the logistics sectors that could mobilize resources in terms of capacity of stopping some things, but also they could represent the feelings of the 80% of the public opinion in Italy, according to the opinion polls, that brought about 1 million people on the street on Monday, with all people organizing it, saying, how did we succeed in this? Because of course it's a moment. So repression, this was a sort of preparation for something less optimistic, but it was, I wanted to present these pictures also to show that repressions sometimes can backfire, and you can have this turning point in which a threshold is overcome, and the public opinion that seems to be in all countries, including Germany, very morally shocked by the genocide, will go to the streets and will feel empowered. But then the other side of the presentations, repressive strategies. This is a movement that is not violent, but that is indeed targeting not only the genocide in Gaza, but through the genocide in Gaza, what Gaza represents for us. So also, what does it mean for universities to reflect on boycotting of Israel, also in terms of what we want to do with our knowledge, what we want to do with our teaching, with our research, and so on. The workers, the dock workers in Genova were asking themselves, what is the meaning of our work? Should not be bringing arms to kill people, but it should be filling the ship with life. This is so it is not by chance, I think, that this movement has polarized repression, because it has addressed, in fact, very central issues in our societies. And it has polarized the repression of different types. So I think that it also speaks to the research that you have been doing, because it has polarized repression in the streets through various forms, especially what we called protest incapacitations. So interventions not to contain violence, but to avoid protest altogether. In Germany, a famous case has been the Congress for Palestine, when, for instance, Yanis Varoufakis was blocked from entering Germany. Abu Sitta and others, people who had to intervene, were blocked at the border and sent back to their own countries. This was illegal. This was clearly illegal. And many of the type of interventions that have been done by the police, which in Berlin has been doing 5 acts of repression per day in the streets, and in very violent ways, they have constantly been declared illegal by the judiciary, arresting people because they call for free Palestine, from the river to the sea considered as an anti-Semitic slogan, support for boycott considered as anti-Semitic. The judiciary has, in most of the cases, declared this type of interventions by the police illegal, but too late. But when the protest had already been stopped. But there were also other type of repression that are the ones that have been mentioned in the round table at the end. For instance, the intimidations, the students risking losing their grants, but also risking being deported if they are international students. There have been people who have been fired, but there have been also people who have been defunded, people and organizations. And this is something that dovetails very much with your research. So one of the main instruments used to get the complicity of the uncivic societies have been the threat of defunding to artists and academics that have produced in Germany the same type of effects that they are producing in the United States now, a sort of preemptive obedience, trying to placate the tyrant in through accepting what is asking for. So, what are the explanations? One explanation that has been given often for the German case, but also in France, in Italy, with less emphasis, is the fact that the Holocaust still explains the special protections that Israel has acquired by Western government, the evident double standards that we see, and that this is something that is started already in 1948. It is true that, of course, the Nakba was at the origins of these forms of repression. But at the same time, if we look more carefully about the evolution of the use of anti-Semitism as an accusation against the left and against migrants, this is much more recent. This is related in Germany with reunifications and the need to find a sort of positive national identifications, putting Nazism in bracket as a breaking in history without seeing colonial crimes before and after that. It was an attempt to use a new wave of Jewish reforestation is the terms that Anna Zuberi has used, a new wave of migrations from Soviet Union as a way to reconstitute the Jewish community that had been destroyed by Nazism. But especially what I think has been relevant is the fact that on the far right on the one hand, but also then by imitation on the center left and part of the left, the liberal left, the Green parties in the German case, anti-Semitism attributed as responsibilities of the migrants allowed to create a clean consciousness for the Western, for the Germans, for the bio-Germans, and at the same time to outsource the guilt on others. That, as it was mentioned also earlier on, had nothing to do with the Holocaust. This also went through the attack that were involving, as I mentioned, not only migrants and not only of Arab origins, but also universalist Jewish, left-wing Jewish, anti-Zionist Jews, like Masha Gessen or Nancy Fraser, a famous political theorist, both of them claiming their Jewish origins, but locating them in an anti-Zionist type of conceptions of Judaism as diasporic type of identities. So next slide. So what I tried to make sense of this type of development, I did through the use of the concept of a moral panic. Moral panic is a concept that has been used in the UK to describe the ways in which existing problems are reframed as a sort of attack on the moral basis of a society. And the guilt is attributed through scapegoating to others, so to the migrants, to the young people, to the far left, to the radicals, and so on. That are defined as false devils in this type of approach. That is, as those who attack the fundamental roots of the societies itself. In this, they tend to create, based on fake news, criminalizations of some groups, not for what they do, but for what they are. This is an element that also criminologists have been looking at in this form of repressions. You are not accused because you have thrown a stone, but because you belong to a milieu that is considered to be anti-Semite. As Cohen wrote, the moral barricades are manned by editors, bishops, politicians, and other right-thinking people. I think this is an important element. It is not just the police in the street. It is not just the governments. It is the type of campaigns, stigmatizations that happens through media, but also often through different organizations. Now, going back to the positive examples that I gave on the Italian case, in this moment, the main trade union, the CGL, the center-left parties like Partito Democratico, Movimento 5 Stelle, and Sinistra Italiana are denouncing the genocide. 4 of them are in the global Sumud flotilla. But this did not happen immediately. So in the first months and the first year, all these actors were fearful of being stigmatized as anti-Semite. And even if rank and file grassroots members pointed at what was happening in Gaza, they were afraid of the attacks and only moved because now electorally they realized that it is important for them. Of course, it's not just the instrumental. There have been also people who believed in that. I'm sure that those who are on the global Sumud flotilla now are among them. But it is also important that there was a long process. The AMPI, the Italian associations of the partisans during the resistance, in the beginning, they did not mobilize because of this sort of climate. And so there are moral panic entrepreneurs, including journalists, politicians of various parties, also administrative bodies, and this is also what you call the administrative forms of repression is important here, because, for instance, universities became places not of free speech and critical thinking, but places in which the university administrations has cancelled speeches in Germany to the extreme of cancelling speech of Francesca Albanese, cancelling speech even of scholars of the Jewish Voices for a Right Peace in the Middle East that are considered to be anti-Semitic. False devils have been singled out, especially on the left. The migrant populations, especially from Arab and Muslim countries, and the forms of discipline have been witch hunt campaigns and defunding and different forms of discriminations. I also think that's a useful concept to address this type of developments is the concept of soft repression that Myra Vasberry is used in order to see how feminist activists were stigmatized, not only outside of their own environment, not only in public, but also through the type of pressures that came from the direct environment, working environment, family environment, and so on. And so soft repressions is not soft in terms of consequences. The consequences can be extremely high in emotional, but also in material terms. But it is soft in the sense that it is also less visible, and it happens through the intimidations coming from social milieus. So maybe you can skip this. I skip also stop there. Yes. So if looking at the German case, what facilitated this type of developments of very extremely high level of repression has been a sort of bureaucratization of policies against anti-Semitism that's in part are parallel to what is happening in France as well. So the adoptions of the definitions of anti-Semitism of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, that was never thought when it was proposed to be an instrument for legal. In fact, it was an instrument for archiving materials on anti-Semitism forms. But it has been weaponized, promoted by Israel directly, especially during the Netanyahu governments, and has been used, especially in the examples that it included, in order to make this type of assimilation that Macron has explicitly mentioned several times. For us, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It is not true. I mean, it never was true in the definitions of anti-Semitism when it was used as a form of racism. But it became through this type of definitions in which criticism of Israel, the definition says, could be considered as anti-Semite. Parallel historical comparison and sociological comparison, like the one Masha Gessen was guilty of, are considered as anti-Semite. So talking about genocide, talking about Holocaust, talking about apartheid, talking about ghettos, if connected with the situations that Israel is imposing in the occupied part of the Palestine, are considered automatically anti-Semitic. This happened through a series of parliamentary resolutions, which are not laws, but have an effect nevertheless, because they work as benchmarks for the repressive organizations. Also through repeated parliamentary resolutions, the BDS, so boycott, divest, and sanctions movement, that is a non-violent alternative to other forms of resistance, has been defined anti-Semite. Not made illegal, but made illegal funding and giving public resources to the BDS. Plus to all artists, scholars, academics, intellectuals, and so on, that have signed petitions for boycotting academic institutions in Israel, which was the case of the firing of Nancy Fraser. And then something very German was the creation of a special commissioner for the fight against anti-Semitism, which multiplied itself in all German states, in the Federal Republic, but also in each cities, in each universities, you have the appointment of these commissioners. It would not be a problem if the commissioners was appointed to address different forms of inequalities and different forms of racism. But the way in which the task of the commissioner is formulated is to agree in consultations with the official organizations of pro-Israeli Jews and Israeli embassy itself on the various issues, and so collecting information and so on that are often then used. I don't know how long you want me to
5 minutes.
5 minutes more. So
Let's move.
And I will finish also on the political and cultural opportunities, because all this bureaucratization didn't happen by chance, but it was pushed for by a move on the right of the entire political system that I saw in the German case, but that it is similar also in the French case. So Israeli security was defined as raison d'etat. Raison d'etat, in a Machiavellian perspective, is something bad. It's the cynicism of those in power that is considered to be also justify illegal type of actions. In the German case, the raison d'etat of the defense of Israel is indeed justifying illegal type of actions, but it is considered not only something that is positive for the image of Germany itself, but also something that could be imposed upon people. So nowadays, laws on naturalization, citizenship, and even for refugees have the clausula that you have, as an individual, recognize the right of Israel to exist. As Francesca Albanese mentioned in a very clear way, states do not have a right to exist. They exist when they are recognized by other states, but it is also absolutely unusual to ask that a citizen, an individual, recognize the right of, I don't know, Catalonia to exist. And so politically, the problem was the convergence of all parties from the far-right Alternative für Deutschland to, in many cases, also Die Linke, that now is making a bit of a turning point, but followed this type of raison d'etat for a long time, especially when they were in government at the local level. And including the Green and including the SPD, that I think at this point will never be able to distance themselves from what they did. And finally, at the level of, stay on that, in terms of cultural opportunities, I think it's if we want to look at the ways in which all these discourses penetrated the civic societies and so on, a main ways have been through the development of a clash of civilizations narratives someone mentioned before. So the visions of the migrants as those responsible for anti-Semitism, but also for all what is not functioning in the countries. And instead, the affirmation of the identities of the Germans or the French or the Italians, because we still have a far-right government, notwithstanding the protest, of the assumptions that Western civilizations has been clean from the guilt of the Nazism, and that nowadays it is on others. Just want to show the last slide, because I liked these pictures, the creativity of the movements. I think what I want to conclude upon is moral panics were important in all the moments that I've studied. So all the shifts in the administrative and political positions were pushed through by moral panic based on fake news. Based on fake news, like in that demonstrations, people said Jewish should be killed. Never happened. Later on, it was discovered that it never happened. But they were the triggers of this moral panic. And eventually, what I think the conflict is about is the conceptions of the identity of the West as a clean and just and civilized countries, while in a moment in which instead in the social movements, in the left, la gauche, the type of reflections on the colonial crimes, the type of sufferance that the West has imposed on other populations, not only on the Jewish people during the Nazi periods, is more and more widespread. So I wanted to conclude here because of these pictures that I took from protesters that show how the accusations of anti-Semitism is at the same time dangerous, a risk, because it produces and has produced for a long time a form of stigmatizations, but can also be, say, resisted. So that the poster says 0% anti-Semitism, 100% with Gaza, and it points at the fact that anti-racism today means being sensitive, but also mobilized against the genocide in Gaza. And I think that on the issues of anti-Semitism, if you want to conclude with an optimist note, the fact that Trump became the biggest defender of Israel tend to empty out the meaning of anti-Semitism more and more. Thank you.
Thank you. Caterina, Kinda?
Yeah.
Who wants to start?
Comme tu veux, toi, t'as préparé.
On va faire la bonne élève.
Si tu restes
Drink some water or something?
So thank you very much for this presentation, and Julien for inviting me to discuss it. So so I have a few comments. No, not a few, many, but I will try to summarize comments and questions because the book is short. Okay, the book is short, and your presentation even shorter, of course. So most of my questions are actually invitations for you to develop more on some points that you raise in the book. I think one of the main highlights of the book is to deal with this very singular German case. For me, like on the individual, on the personal level, because I know it much less than the Israeli-Palestinian case, but also the French or the Italian. So I learned a lot, and I think it's very important to have it within the transnational comparative analysis that you sketch out at the end of the book. But then one first question would be like, once again, the German case is a very peculiar one. So so maybe you said it's a magnifying lens, maybe you can develop more on how like it can help us understand trends that we see elsewhere, given that once again there are some trends, and I'm thinking now of the anti-Deutsch, for example, which are absolutely unique to the German case. So for me, for example, an important point you make with this research is the dissemination of this bottom-up soft repression by nonviolent means, by doxing, by all the techniques that you mentioned. And this is really something that we can see in many other countries and on many other topics. So maybe I'll go straight to the second question. I was actually like, it struck me how late the anti-Deutsch comes in your book. I think I was wondering one page before, like, but when is she gonna talk about it? And then it appeared, page 84. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about this phenomenon, but about how, like, I researched a little bit and I found that there's some sort of consensus in the academic sphere on both its statistic marginality and its cultural relevance, which is something quite interesting to me. I also was wondering if you encountered during your research, the Israeli leftist community, Israeli Jewish leftist community that is present in Germany, especially in Berlin, which is also quite interesting phenomenon, right? Because these are people who are radical leftists, not all of them, of course, but most of them in their own country, and who decided to leave because of their politics in many cases and settle in Berlin, which is the heart of the Nazi genocide, and whose, as you said, whose Jewish community was destroyed during the genocide. So, for example, here we have my friend and colleague Caterina, who worked a little bit in this community. I was wondering, again, if you encountered them and what is the role that they play in the solidarity movement in Germany. Another interesting point, this is more of a comment, something that struck me while reading your book, but in general, while thinking of this topic, is it was your concluding remark, is that in the end, like, all this repression means to the total emptiness of the word anti-Semitism, right? Like, and something you say also towards the end of the book, it's like there is a dramatic lack of definition of what anti-Semitism means today. And we should remind ourselves that anti-Semitism is for and foremost the hatred of Jews for being Jews. And now it doesn't mean, it's not only that its definitions have become vague, is that there is no more definition at all, basically, or it has completely transformed the meaning of this word. On the repression itself, I think one another point that maybe that maybe is not that developed in the book, is even if you say it, of course, is how this repression affects very differently racialized people than Jews and white people. So I'll go back to the question of migrants and asylum seekers. But generally, what we see here, also in the academic sphere, of course, is the targeting of Palestinian scholars, scholars who bear an Arab-sounding name in any way, with the fact of being basically non-objective. And so this is something, again, that should, that I wanted to stress in a way that it's definitely not the same kind of repression. And I think, for example, like in the niche where I work, in scholars dealing with Palestine, Israel, in sociology, political science, anthropology, and so on. For example, one of the main topics we work on nowadays is the applying of the paradigm of settler colonialism to the history of Palestine and to the present, of what happens nowadays in Israel-Palestine. So to understand Israel as a settler colonial state. And this is something that I came to realize when I talked about it being a white European researcher. Is definitely not the same than when an Arab or even more a Palestinian researcher uses the same paradigm. So your book was published in September 2024, if I'm right. I wanted also to ask you, like, what happened in Germany since March 2025? How did the situation change? Thinking, of course, of the announcement to halt military exports to Israel on the 8th of August, to political pressure now to recognize the state of Palestine. And more generally, I think March 2025, so the break by Israel of the unilateral break by Israel of the truce and going back to bombing heavily the Gaza Strip, it is a turning point. It is a turning point everywhere. And in this sense, I was, what you said, that the center left in Italy, like they really believe that they didn't mobilize before against genocide because, I mean, out of fear of stigmatization, because I'm not that sure that they were ready to call it a genocide in January 2024. Like what we observed is a real change in public discourse after the end of the truce, of the ceasefire, which of course bears a lot of paradoxes and questions in itself. Also, still in comparing with Italy. So of course, the question of what Palestinian solidarity is about is crucial, and as you said, it is about many things, with all due differences, right? So, for example, I think one of the reasons why it is much about class struggle or labor in Italy is, of course, as you said, a matter of political opportunities, of strategic opportunities of some sectors of society and so on. But it's also cultural in a way that I feel the colonial question, for example, is much less present in the public debate in Italy, not in general, but as regards Italian history. And it should be, because we don't know much about, for example, Italian colonialism in Ethiopia. It's something that we don't study at school. It's a shame, but it is less present. So so maybe that helps also like situating the struggle on other I think fields, while what we see in France here is that solidarity with Palestine is very, very much linked to the history of colonial Algeria. Very much in a way, and post-colonial immigration to France, and this is something that is very, very much present. I mean, more and more, at least, also in the academic sphere and so on. So these are things that you can't find, of course, everywhere. I will just say one more minute. So one question that I was wondering as well while reading you is, what do these moral panic campaigns say about the role of artists and intellectuals and academics in our society? You talked a bit about it in the conclusion of the book. I would like to hear more. Does it mean that their role has become more important in the eyes of the political power and of society at large, or are they just the easiest scapegoats because they are more visible on the public scene? And just a remark, I will stop here to the question of the comparison that you were talking about now in your presentation. The problem of comparison with genocide, with all you have been saying, is also something that we find in the academic sphere, in the sense that we were talking about it the other day at another conference. Genocide studies have been very much monopolized by Holocaust studies, and I think like we used to say Holocaust and genocide studies, right? So it's not now only because of the genocide in Palestine, but it was a long path to open up to this field of research, to studying the Armenian genocide or the genocide in Rwanda. Like it's really like the way the Holocaust is considered as a paradigm of genocide also in the academia. I will stop here.
Thank you, Caterina.
Ok, alors,
Alors du coup, français, anglais, c'est comme tu veux.
on s'est absolument alors, je vous remercie. Je vais être beaucoup plus concise que ma chère collègue. Alors, moi, ce qui m'a frappé, fait plaisir, et en même temps m'a juste rappelé une situation que j'avais vécue il y a un an, qui est que vous utilisez sans complexe, effectivement, dans un livre qui a été publié l'année dernière, les mots de Nakba, de génocide, de colonialisme, d'apartheid. Ces mots-là, je ne vais pas dire qu'on ne peut pas les prononcer dans le milieu académique en France, mais en fait un peu quand même. Et l'année dernière, j'ai réalisé une conférence à Rome où des collègues, donc c'était à l'automne 2024, où des collègues des États-Unis et d'Italie, parlant de la situation au Proche-Orient, ont parlé du mot génocide. Et personne n'a été surpris, sauf moi. Enfin, j'ai bondi en fait sur ma chaise et évidemment je me suis reprise, heureusement. Mais ça m'a étonnée, ça fait du bien. J'espère que les choses vont changer, en tout cas ici. Mais en gros, en France, si je caricature, il y a quelques mois encore, on vous aurait demandé, après la lecture de votre bouquin, de bien préciser en propos liminaires que vous condamniez les attaques terroristes du 7 octobre commises par le Hamas. C'était la seule chose qui vous donnait l'autorisation de pouvoir parler. Enfin, je caricature un petit peu. Bon, si on revient à votre bouquin, en fait, enfin à votre livre, l'impression, c'est l'impression avec laquelle, en tout cas, moi, j'en suis ressortie, c'est celle de vivre immergé à l'intérieur d'un narratif qui réduit un conflit par nature complexe. Je ne vais pas dire que le conflit israélo-palestinien, arabo-israélien, etc., est plus complexe qu'un autre, mais en tout cas qui réduit un conflit à une fable assez simple où Israël est érigé au rang de victime, enfin au rang de la victime, la seule, l'unique. À partir de là, ça coupe l'herbe sous le pied de tout discours un petit peu contradictoire, mais surtout de toute possibilité de discussion. Et ça coupe aussi la possibilité de faire du comparatisme. Alors, pour nous, chercheurs occidentaux, mais aussi et surtout pour les chercheurs et artistes venant des Suds, héritiers de la colonisation, dont nous sommes responsables, porteurs d'autres narratifs, d'autres histoires aussi avec l'Holocauste, avec la Seconde Guerre mondiale, et qui sont complètement passés sous silence. L'impossibilité d'exprimer son désaccord sape ce qui est finalement la capacité à donner une force productive à un discours en y inscrivant de nouvelles significations. Et bref, c'était une des choses que j'avais trouvé assez stimulante à la lecture de votre livre. Mais finalement, ça pose la question du frein ou des freins qui sont mis à une certaine liberté d'expression. Alors, bon, comme Caterina a beaucoup parlé, elle a dit des choses que j'aurais dites, moins bien qu'elle, évidemment. Mais comme Julien m'a un petit peu tendu la perche, je vais le faire. En fait, à l'université, alors je ne vais pas forcément parler du cas de Lille, mais les cas d'accusation d'antisémitisme, toujours avec cette définition d'un flou pas très artistique, sont récurrentes et depuis longtemps. C'est antérieur au 7 octobre, mais ça s'est évidemment démultiplié avec des collègues qu'on a accusés d'avoir des prises de position antisémites sur base de messages sur leurs réseaux sociaux personnels, hein, pas du tout de propos tenus dans le cadre professionnel. Bon, là, on pourrait poser la question de savoir quel rôle doit jouer l'institution universitaire pour protéger la liberté de la recherche, tout en luttant contre les discriminations. Mais quel rôle doit jouer l'institution universitaire aussi pour protéger les collègues qui sont en danger? Il y a eu la mise en place du programme Pause, très efficace, enfin il m'a semblé très efficace, en tout cas dans le cas des collègues turcs et ukrainiens, légèrement plus balbutiant dans le cas des collègues palestiniens, puisque le programme Pause est... alors, on espère que les derniers lauréats vont pouvoir arriver, mais grosso modo, il y a une suspension à partir avant l'été, en fait. Donc, des gens qui avaient obtenu leur financement au mois d'avril, en tout cas, étaient toujours en attente. Certains avaient reçu des appels leur disant de se préparer à bouger peut-être. Sinon, ce qu'on a pu constater collectivement au Congrès des études sur le Moyen-Orient au début de l'été, c'est que, et ça vous le dites bien en fait dans votre livre, c'est qu'il y a une telle ambiance de dénonciation de l'antisémitisme comme étant absolument normal. Du coup, il y a une autocensure extrêmement forte, mais à tel point qu'on ne parle même plus entre collègues, c'est-à-dire entre institutions. On ne sait pas ce qui se passe. Et quand moi, je racontais des choses qui s'étaient passées à l'université de Lille, les collègues disaient « Ok, il faut qu'on centralise tout ça », des collègues de l'université de Lyon, Paris, etc. La même chose. Peut-être. Donc, plus largement, moi, je me demandais, est-ce qu'on assiste à une redéfinition des frontières du disciple? Est-ce qu'on peut parler de rétrécissement démocratique, ce qui avait été analysé dans le cas de la Tunisie notamment, mais pas que. Pour revenir à ce que je disais tout à l'heure sur la sensation de vivre à l'intérieur d'un narratif qui est un peu oppressant. J'ai vécu en Syrie un petit moment sous Bachar el-Assad, j'ai vécu au Liban dans des villages contrôlés à 95% par le Hezbollah libanais. Et j'ai la même sensation à l'université dans le contrôle de ma parole. Enfin, non, c'est moins confortable à l'université parce que finalement, en Syrie comme au Liban, je connaissais les règles du jeu. Elles étaient relativement clairement énoncées. Voilà, c'est un peu... Ouais, je pense que je vais m'arrêter là pour des raisons de timing. Je vous remercie.
Merci Tilda. L'heure est avancée et nous sommes tous un peu fatigués après cette longue journée, mais vous avez certainement des remarques, des questions, des réactions. Ne vous auto-censurez pas. Il est encore temps qu'on redonnera la parole à Donatella ensuite. Alors moi, je vais le faire, je vais rajouter ma petite pied. Moi, j'ai toujours des questions. Moi, j'ai toujours... Je vais. Alors, je sais plus si c'est anglais ou français. Maybe one remark and one question. One remark is that what I think is interesting in your work here is the use of the concept of moral panic, which is not so common to actually conceptualize repression. We actually did the same, not to focus on pro-Palestinian solidarity movement repression, but on previous work on the repression of anti-Islamophobia movement, and now moral panics on these topics actually was a condition of the repression of the Muslim civil society in France, precisely doing what you mentioned, is targeting actors not about what they did, but about who they were. Basically, it's ongoing. So I mean, and I think we probably it's useful actually to think about this type of moments. But there is also something, I mean, when we read your book, something depressing. And I mean, I don't know, when I was listening to Kinda also, just kind of, there's rouleau compresseur, I would say in French, and it's something like, wow, what we can do about that? And the question is a bit, I mean, we have strategies and tactics to anti-repression tactics for anti-policing, and there is kind of a long knowledge in social movements about how to enter. And I was wondering to what extent in Germany, for instance, and what you saw also in Italy, what was the answers to this form of repression, and what are the clues? I mean, just like you mentioned it a little bit at the end of the book, you didn't talk about it, and I think it's pretty important also to give a bit of hope. I was wondering to what extent, I mean, the question of a counter-narrative is probably important. Another element, and it was mentioned also before, is the role of Jews critic of the genocide that are also heavily repressed in France right now. I'm thinking about the JFP, for instance, that is really targeting, among others. So I mean, looking at the German situation, what are the answers of these groups against this kind of rouleau compresseur?
Merci. Merci. I also try to be focused and not too long. I think that your first questions and your reflections go in the directions of thinking about a comparative dimension, because as you mentioned, by now in Italy, but not only in Italy, in Spain, in many other contexts, it is a genocide recognized by anyone. We tried to reflect in a comparative perspective for the project that we are doing now. And an hypothesis we are building upon is that the repression is higher in countries that are more directly and heavily involved in arms trading. And so this type of interest, Italy is also, but with 1%, Germany is with 33%, and the United States with 66%. So it is huge. And this is not only arms trading, weapons, is also a type of networks, ties that, for instance, in Germany, the trade union builds with Israel. The Italian trade unions build ties with Palestine. In Germany, the religious Christian, especially Protestants, allied with Israel very much. In Italy, the Catholic countries with the tradition of peace protest has been very explicit. So there is also in The Guardian, I think a couple of days ago, the priest against the genocide. A couple of these priests against the genocide were candidates for becoming popes. For the first time in my life, also preferred candidates that they didn't win. But it is extremely strong, and it also, when you have the trade unions and the religious organizations that have intervened on issues of peace and so on, that support the protest in solidarity with Gaza, it gives also legitimacy. But another issue that we considered as a potential explanations is also the degree of responsibility and involvement of countries in the Nakba, in the original one, because I think that this explains the case of the UK very much, where there is a very strong repression as well, and the French case as well. While what we saw is indeed a quite different type of atmosphere in Italy and Spain that have been traditionally also politically more pro-Palestine, but also in countries in which there are strong traditions of independentist movements. So if you go everywhere around in Italy and in Spain, you find Palestinian flags. If you go to the Basque countries or to Ireland, you find
more than in Palestine.
And this, I think, also explains how the issues of the genocide resonate with the past. So in Italy, the idea of a resistance and the role that these resistances played against fascism is, I think, still able to build those counter-narratives that you were talking about. And in other cases, there are more specific type of explanations. For instance, Norway has been quite liberal and tolerant because of the Oslo Accord. Interestingly, very different from the Danish case, in which instead the repression was very high. But what was interesting also for us to observe, sad but interesting, is that the governments did not align on left or right divide. So that repressions was driven by liberal center-left governments in many countries. So the highest repressions in Germany was already there with the Green and SPD governments. Biden is highly responsible for what it happened, and it's the Democrats. And also in Denmark, similar. Macron is not considered, but it is bad. And not at all on the left. On the anti-German, and I would also connect it with, in general, the role of diasporas. In the German case, you are very right. There is important work by Anna Jungs on the systematic cancellations of Palestinian culture, history, any type of studies on Palestine, and repression to which the anti-Germans participated of academics and artists with Arab names or foreign names that are systematically looked at by Googling their names with keywords like BDS or like Free Palestine, and then repressed. And in fact, it's not by chance that in Germany, like in the United States, they are strengthening the legal constraints that they can use in order to deport people. And Germany, with the SPD in government, is using exactly the same discourse as Trump, saying we can deport whoever we want without any type of court control on it, because it's an issue of country security. And so they've been trying in recent time to deport one Irish guy and one Polish guy and one American activist there. But the diaspora, I think, is also important in terms of who are the Palestinians' voice. And this, I think, is important also in terms of the beginning of the reflections on colonialism in the Italian movement. Because the diaspora in Italy, the Palestinian diaspora in Italy is small, but recognized. And the second generations of the diasporas were students in the universities who claimed and obtained a respect for their own direct involvement and for representing directly the Palestinian cause. And this had an effect also on many organizations. We interviewed, for instance, feminist organizations that said, we had not reflected on these issues, but we started to work on that. The workers of the harbor, the dock workers in Genova, they said in the beginning, we didn't understand what the Palestinian youth wanted, thought it was a bit distant from our way of reflecting. But then we started to do things together and we discovered that they were right in what they said. And also in this, what was important was the mobilizations from the very beginning in October 2023 of the workers with Arab background, very recent type of migrations, but very high level of repressions and ethnic discrimination, racism, and so on. We did a study on Bologna, and in the periphery of Bologna, in the countryside of Bologna, there are a lot of small enterprises. And when there were marches, with each trains, the workers arrived, organized by the rank and file trade unions, and they were, on the one hand, massive number, and on the other hand, I think also claimed a sort of respect, so that even the police did not enforce the law, because they said, well, if we are in front of 20,000 people, among whom many workers, we cannot repress. So notwithstanding the far-right government that has also used repression and so on, but this type of element remained. Also in terms of diaspora, the Jewish type of diaspora is important. In fact, the Jewish voices for the right in the Middle East are very central in the movement in Germany, also giving some sort of legitimations, or at least they are the only one who can protest when they are called anti-Semites. But they are extremely under attack. So University of Bremen, if you want to list the universities you want to boycott, I have a long list of German universities. And as automatically disinvited one of the scholar of the Jewish Voices for a Right in the Middle East, because the organizations has been defined as extremist. And so the University of Bremen said, we cannot be sure that this person will not say something anti-Semitic. And the diaspora there is especially diaspora, the mobilized one, made of Israeli and American Jews who went away.
We should not, because I think it's
Yeah.
very close.
Okay.
So if you don't want to
We can
sleep
stay
here,
the-
then start an occupation maybe, but
But I think I've said the main things. The role of the artist and academic, I think it is important because it is also a cultural type attack, because the far right also this in general. But you have to invite me again.
can we stop here? I didn't want it to cut you, but thank you.